What's going on, ladies and gents, boys and girls, guardians of all ages, Joker back again once again, and today, before we dive headlong into this Bastion puzzle quest fiasco thing, I wanted to go ahead and read a tweet from this guy, Epon. My apologies if I'm pronouncing that wrong. See, many of you will know it by now, but for those of you who don't, I'm a devil's in the details sort of guy. And let me tell ya, ladies and gents, boys and girls, guardians of all ages, there's enough demons here to get its own Doom spin-off. Epon, for those of you who do not know, is the French community manager for the Destiny community. And in one of his more recent tweets about the Bastion puzzle quest thing, he said, and I quote, "A bit of confusion on everything that's happening today, so I'm going to try to make things a bit clearer. The plan was simple. Release the puzzle in the second half of January. Then, release the quest for Bastion at the end of the month on the 29th as said on the roadmap. If the community was to solve the puzzle, Bastion would be released earlier than expected." Now, I want to make sure that we are all on the same page here. So, for those of you who do not know, last week Osiris appeared with a quest that had us exploring the corridors of time. The first 19 times that you ran it, you got lore. The 20th, you got an emblem. TLDR, one thing led to another, and people started collaborating and putting pieces of this labyrinthine puzzle together. Biases on the table. I have some personal issues with this non-content content that depends on only a couple thousand people and some heads of the community, all collaborating together in the hopes that maybe, just maybe, this isn't one huge cluster F-bomb going the wrong way, or worse, Niobe Labs 2.0, where Bungie forgot to program something, and hopefully, eventually, the community will be able to solve something, so the greater community, the hundreds of thousands of people playing the game, will be able to actually progress in the game. This sort of event has less to do with the entirety of the player base and is created with the knowledge that a couple thousand people out of the hundreds of thousands of people will engage with it. This is why, regardless of the fact that people know the code, that the code is readily available, that you can find guides on the internet, and running the corridors of time is super easy, Bungie has already stated that they are going to invalidate that week worth of effort that people put into solving this puzzle by just handing the Bastion quest out, regardless of if you run the corridors of time in order to unlock it. And honestly, that's kind of pragmatic, because the reality of the situation is the overwhelming majority of the population, the hundreds of thousands of players, don't engage with the game the way that this small 1% of the community does. They don't go on Reddit, they don't go on Twitter. They might at most follow a streamer, subscribe to YouTubers, and watch a couple of videos every now and then when they're stuck on something in the game. Because gasp, shock, horror, the vast majority of people have obligations and a life and interest outside of a video game. I know, novel concept, right? So it makes complete sense that Bungie would have an opportunity for most people who are weekend warriors to be able to pick up this exotic quest and engage with the content, without wasting the time that it takes to look up the code, find a guide, and run the 30 corridors. Something that I know sounds like it should be super easy, barely an inconvenience, but if you don't even know that it's a thing, how are you supposed to look for it? It's not like the game tells you how to do this. So, there is that. But understanding why that invalidation has to happen does not change the fact that that was Bungie's design from the beginning, and it's a bad design. This is why I'm going to reiterate the second half of Epon's tweet before I move forward, because it really does outline bad decisions after bad decisions after bad decisions in this whole debacle on Bungie's part. The plan was simple. Release the puzzle in the second half of January. Then, release the quest for Bastion at the end of the month on the 29th as said on the roadmap. If the community was to solve the puzzle, Bastion would be released earlier than expected. Did you catch that, ladies and gents, boys and girls, guardians of all ages, that little devil in the details? So, according to Bungie, it was entirely possible, even expected, as the 28th is nothing more than a just-in-case backup plan safety net, that this puzzle would take 3 resets to finish, so 2 weeks. I believe I said 3 weeks earlier on Twitter for some of you who follow me over there. What I meant was 3 resets, 2 weeks, but the point still stands. And what is that point, some of you might be wondering? Well, the geniuses over at Bungie, their default position was it was a-okay to waste up to 336 hours of the player base's time for nothing more than the potential to maybe fast track a quest that people had already paid for and were already owed, one that is only not available because it is arbitrarily time-gated to make it look like the Season Pass has more content than it actually has, because Bungie needs to pad the content releases out so it looks like the Season Pass content is an actual value. I mean, imagine the proverbial shit show if the puzzle actually went unsolved and people actually spent 336 hours between the puzzle's initial release and the 28th because that was Bastion's safety net, and people found out that they were just trying to unlock a quest that they were gonna get anyways, just earlier. And they wasted all that time for nothing. And while Bungie lucked out and that's not what happened, that was clearly their plan, to let people spend up to 336 hours between the puzzle's initial release and the 28th, just trying to solve this puzzle. And if they got it, they got it. If they didn't, well, I guess you're shit out of luck. It boggles the mind. I cannot fathom how a room full of people heard this proposed. Heard someone say, heard the words escape somebody's lip flaps as they said, we're gonna release a puzzle. And this puzzle will be potentially unsolvable within the time limit we allot. And this potentially unsolvable puzzle's reward, if people get it correct, will just be early access to content that we've time-gated that they're going to get regardless on the 28th. And somehow, some way, through some Herculean leap in logic that us mere mortals will never be able to comprehend, people, designers, people who are supposed to be intelligent, programmers, code monkeys, the management, they all looked at this and said, yup. I can fathom even less how the same proverbial room of people realized that this puzzle might be too hard to solve in the allotted time and were cognizant enough to actually have a backup plan to release the quest regardless on the 28th, but somehow, some way, didn't realize the utter shit show that would ensue if this whole endeavor went tits up. And it actually took the community from the 14th to the 28th to finish the puzzle, or near enough that it didn't matter. Or worse, the puzzle wasn't finished by the 28th, which was a possibility. And then people found out that, well, they just wasted weeks of their life for nothing because the reward was the friends we made along the way and content we were already going to get. I mean, to be fair, people did actually waste a week of their life for nothing, which is more on Bungie than them, they had no fucking clue. But hey, fucking details. Now, sure, by and large, Bungie dodged what would have been one magnificent self-inflicted wound of a controversy because of the work of a few obsessive-compulsive Redditors, some streamers, and the footwork of a couple thousand people providing the information required to put together this labyrinthine map. I want to be real, I want to be honest, I want to be real honest and make it 100% clear so there is no doubt in anyone's mind. I applaud their efforts. Nothing I am saying here is meant to diminish what they did. They came together and they did something fucking amazing. What I am saying, however, is Bungie got lucky. That there was a few thousand people with nothing better to do with an entire week than try to solve this puzzle. That said, the community's success does not diminish Bungie's intent, which was, to be clear, according to them, to put a puzzle out and let people waste weeks of their life for nothing more than a chance at early access to something people had already paid for and was arbitrarily time-gated to begin with. At no point was Bungie self-aware enough to think maybe, just maybe, wasting the player's time was a bad idea. And you know what? To be fair, for the sake of argument, I'm gonna put it out there. We would be having an entirely different conversation if, from the very beginning, Bungie was transparent, tempered expectations, and told us what people were working towards. But they didn't. which is endemic of a greater problem that has haunted the development of Destiny since day one. For all their proclamation that they're listening, they seem to hear very little. At least until the player base is dying off by the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. But I think that has less to do with them actually hearing us, and more to do with them seeing the dip in profitability. Bungie has always been significantly behind the curve and out of touch with the player base. Look at the current state of the game. PvP is, at the best of times, an unmitigated shit show, and people want them to bring back trials? There's no way, shape, or form that Destiny's PvP is remotely ready for anything that looks remotely like trials. Season of Dawn is a retread of Season of the Undying, which is basically more of the same, but to a lesser extent, of what we got last year with that season pass. Horde modes, lackluster story, kinda nothing for the endgame. Only somehow, some way, Season of Dawn has condensed that to a place where the gameplay is boring, but you know what, to be fair, at least the story and lore is interesting. The exotic quest for Bastion is the exact same boring, banal, copy-paste shit that we get with every exotic quest. It's like the totality of Bungie's quest creation ability is a fill-in-the-blank survey, where it lists how many bounties need to be completed for this quest, how many lost sectors need to be ran, how many X number of enemies do we need to cleave off their asses and return to whatever NPC. All culminating in the unoriginal, uninspired, run through a strike that you've already played hundreds if not thousands of times, but this time there may be a specific enemy somewhere along the line that is just a reskin of every other enemy that you have to kill. It's like Bungie is on autopilot when it comes to content creation. Same shit, different context. To me, the Corridors of Time puzzle is just the latest in a long line of Bungie missing the fucking point. Yes, the community loves puzzles. They love Secret Quest. They love things like Outbreak Perfected and Whisper of the Worm. The Corridors of Time, however, tries to be more Niobe Labs. It's just a lot of hype with no reward. The reason that 0 Hour and Whisper of the Worm work so well is they brought forth new and interesting locations, puzzles, raid-light experiences, challenges for the community to figure out, with all of this culminating in the acquisition of extraordinarily useful gear. On top of that, if not to make this whole thing worse, unlike the aforementioned 0 Hour and Whisper of the Worm quest, the Corridors of Time puzzle is not something the average or even the extraordinary player had the ability to do alone or with their clan or with their friends. Everyone, even the 1% minority of the community who actually participated in gathering the information, was shackled to the progress of a handful of people. And that handful of people's distillation of information, meaning at any point, had these people been wrong or worse, had the Corridor of Time been a Niobe Labs 2.0, suffering from some game-breaking issue or Bungie forgetting to program something, this entire exercise would have been more pointless and an even bigger waste of time than it already was. I'm sorry, moving up the release date of an arbitrarily time-gated piece of content that is only time-gated in the first place to make the season pass look like it has more going on than it actually does is not a reward. It's an insult to injury. Speaking of rewards, I guess I should take a moment to talk about this non-events, non-reward. Like I said, something like 1,367 words ago, give or take, depending on how much I've gone off script, which was a lot! The Bastion Exotic Quest is the same exact copy-paste quest that we have for everything. Stop me if you've heard this one before. Go talk to an NPC. Then go to a location. This one just happens to be the Tangled Shore. Then you go there and you kill 5 servitors and or captains to get intel. The quickest way to do this is go kill the servitor that can be respawned at the entrance of the Lost Sector next to the spider. Then go talk to the spider. Then go back to that Lost Sector you were just farming servitors in, run it like normal, and kill the captain enemy that spawns at the end. Then we get the fun and repetitive task of completing 10 spider bounties, killing 30 powerful enemies, and doing 8 public events! Then we go to another Lost Sector in the Tangled Shore and go through it until you find some blue, glowy bullshit. Lastly, run a quest version of the Hollowed Lair strike. You know, a strike that most people have already run tens of thousands of times. But this time you get to kill a new enemy at the end. Then you go back to the tower and kill Saint Yes! Kill Saint 14 in Mortal Kombat for Bastion. Who knew? Greatest quest ever, 10 out of 10 would recommend. No, really, you just speak to Saint 14 and he gives you Bastion. As for Bastion itself, it's, I don't know how to feel about it. I guess I would put it at like a 6 or 7 out of 10. It's not world-endingly OP. It's certainly not better than most current meta PvP and PvE exotics, but it's also not a complete and utter wash of an exotic. And it's most certainly not Wishender or Rat King or Hard Light, and I would be lying if I didn't say that I had fun using it. But is it Last Word? Or is it Thorn or Ace of Spades on PC? No, and it's certainly not going to replace any of your heavy-hitting PvE exotics. Bastion is an exotic that exists in a game with way better options. You have Duskrock Blues, you have Last Word, you have Thorn, you have Ace of Spades, you have, well, like Truth, you have Izanami, you have Anarchy, you have tons and tons of things, you have Arantel. Given a choice, I would rather use any of these other weapons over Bastion. That's not to say that Bastion is bad, it's just kind of average, flavor of the week. All in all, I'm just really disappointed with Bungie, especially as of late. Destiny has been bad before, and it's had its fair share of issues, but now it's worse than bad. It's just boring. The quality of Destiny has been slipping ever since its triumphant return to form with Forsaken, and honestly, I believe the Season Pass model is doing more harm than good. You take this sort of content creation cycle with developers so out of touch with the player base that it takes upwards of 6 months to a year for basic common sense changes, on top of an internal feedback system that doesn't kill a proposal that literally had no problem with seeing thousands of players wasting weeks of their life to potentially get slightly earlier access to content that was already paid for, but has been arbitrarily time-gated to make the dwindling returns on the Season Pass content model look like there's more there than there actually is, allowing Bungie to pad out an afternoon's worth of content at best into a month's worth of content. And the fact that my biggest grievance with this whole debacle could have been solved with some transparency, some basic communication, and Bungie giving an ounce of a shit about players' time and investment into their franchise, outside of the instances where they need to sell us something, says a lot about Bungie and the way that they are currently developing this game. In fact, an uncharitable opinion might suggest that Bungie chose not to say anything from the beginning because this sort of puzzle hype has always brought the community together. And knowing that the reward was nothing more than early access to arbitrarily time-gated content would not have garnered the same sort of hype that this Season Pass desperately needs. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Remember to like if you did, subscribe for more content, donate to my Patreon if you are feeling particularly generous, but above all else, stay frosty.